me Yan Xiaonan is UFC 300 worthy? Are you out of your mind? Aren't you trying to make sales? Don't you want people to actually buy the pay-per-view? UFC 300 should sell over 1 million pay-per-views. You don't need Conor McGregor. You just need to think a little bit. Okay? Congrats. Now you have a card that's going to sell the old measly 600,000. Rakic isn't a star. Bilal ain't a fucking star. Yan Xiaonan and Zhang Weili, they're not pay-per-view draws. This may not even sell 500K.
Hello people, welcome to the channel. Today we will be talking about the ever controversial UFC 300 coming up in a couple of months, April 13th. Now, as you've seen the opening clips of Mr. Tracy, he does not like this card, very frustrated, and he's put his frustration on. He does not think this card will sell the amount of pay-per-views that he thinks it should. For one, who cares? It's not like as fans we are financially incentivized for the pay-per-view to sell well. We are just, like as YouTubers, I guess, we are incentivized to want the cards to perform well in terms of how the fights actually play out, because we want to be able to talk about it. We want to have a good outcome to talk about. But when it comes to the numbers of it selling, I don't really think it matters. When it comes to him saying Zhang Weili isn't UFC 300 worthy, maybe, and he can call me a casual if he wants. I'm waiting for the Tracy army to come and say that I'm just coping and gobbling fucking Daddy Dana's nuts or something, but I think Zhang Weili, she's my favorite WMMA fighter. I love her. I want her on this card. I like her on this card. Would I have preferred to see her against Alexa Grasso? Sure. And Lucas Tracy said that, but I still think her against Yan Xiaonan is a good enough fight to be on UFC 300. I really do. I really like her. And I think this card is getting too much hate. So I've pulled up, well, first I've pulled up UFC 100 and 200. And then I've pulled up some of the better cards in UFC history. And the cards leading up to UFC 300. And we're going to talk about them and to see how UFC 300 stacks up. But first, if you look up on the screen, right now the quote-unquote main event on Google, but the co-main event, Max Holloway, Justin Gaethje. Then we got Zhang Weili versus Yan Xiaonan, Alexander Rakic and Yuri Prochazka, and Charles Oliveira, Arman Tsarukyan. Now that is not in order of what it's going to be, but that's what I believe the main card will consist of. So we will be comparing the main cards of the rest of these to those 5 fights. Well, those 4 fights plus a main event yet to be announced, but in theory I think will be the best fight out of those 5. So, first one we'll look at is UFC 100. Opening up the main card, you have Yoshihiro Akiyama versus Alan Belcher, followed by Dan Henderson versus Bisping. One. You got George St. Pierre versus Thiago Alves. You got Brock Lesnar, Frank Mir, and John Fitch versus Paulo Thiago. Now, this card, legends laced in and out. Now, obviously, some of them weren't legends at the time. You know, Bisping, Henderson. Well, Henderson at the time still, but you know, Bisping was like 8 years or whatever it was out of his championship run. GSP in his prime. Brock Lesnar. I mean, this was a good card, but in my opinion, I think fight for fight, UFC 300 is deeper, more stacked, especially if you start going on to the prelims. Although John Jones was on the prelims of UFC 100, I'm pretty sure. I forget against who. But, yeah, I believe UFC 300 beats this card pretty handedly. We'll move up to 200 now. Now, of course, this wasn't the original card that was supposed to go down. Of course, we were supposed to have, I think McGregor was supposed to be on this card. John Jones tested positive. But we're going to go off the card that took place. You have Amanda Nunes defeating Miesha Tate in the main event by submission. Brock Lesnar, Mark Hunt, Daniel Cormier, Anderson Silva took place. You have Jose Aldo fighting Frankie Edgar at featherweight. And you have Cain Velasquez versus Travis Brown at heavyweight. And Cain Velasquez taking that one. This card, I think it's pretty close to UFC 100, to be honest. When I start to look at it now, I haven't really looked at these cards back to back before recording this video, and I'm not gonna sit here and pretend that I watched either of these cards live at the time. I've went back and rewatched them now in the past couple of years, but I was not watching UFC at the time of these cards. Keep that in mind, of course. Now, some of the cards we're going to talk about in a minute, I did watch live, and it's actually what got me into UFC, but we're going to talk about that after. But the main card that got me into hardcore UFC was Khabib Conor, but I've watched a few before that. Moving on to the next card I want to talk about, we got Conor versus Mendes for the interim featherweight championship. Robbie Lawler versus Rory McDonald, co-main event. You have Jeremy Stevens versus Dennis Bermudez, featured fight. Gunnar Nelson, Brandon Thatch, and Thomas Almeida, Brad Pickett. Now, this one, little top-heavy for me. Top 3 fights are good, are really, really good. I don't think this even comes close, but when I was looking up some of the best cards in UFC history, this card landed a lot on a lot of those lists. I think it is very liked among the common crowd, and I'm just going to throw it on this list just to say that I talked about it. Moving on, another card I want to talk about. When Conor McGregor went undisputed against Jose Aldo, you had Luke Rockhold, Chris Weidman in the co-main event. Then you had Yoel Romero, Ronaldo Souza, Damian Maia, Gunnar Nelson, Max Blessed Holloway versus Jeremy Stevens. I like this one much more than the last. And, of course, you're going to see a lot of McGregor because, especially in the 2015, 2018 kind of time frame, this is when they were stacking around McGregor. They were, building the company around McGregor. This is where they made McGregor the star that he is today. Now, moving on, one more McGregor card I wanted to talk about. Everyone's seen this one coming. We have Champ Conor going against Eddie Alvarez, Madison Square Garden, co-main evented by the draw between Tyron Woodley and Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. Fantastic fight. This is a 3-title card as well. You had Joanna Jędrzejczyk versus Carolina, whatever her last name is. I should have practiced that before I started this video. You have Chris Weidman, Yoel Romero. You have Rocky Pennington, Miesha Tate. This one, very good card. I did watch this one live. I remember this one happening, but it was still before, of course, I was a hardcore viewer. But, of course, that's why I'm only glancing over a lot of these, is because I didn't watch them live, so it's hard. Despite I've went back and I've rewatched them, it's hard to really understand the magnitude that they had in the moment where I wasn't, on Twitter, I wasn't on Facebook, Instagram, I wasn't watching the build-up to these fights, But I am watching, I've been watching for years now, I am watching the build-up to these coming pay-per-views. And in my research for this video, by research I just mean, looking up a load of cards and reading them over, I started thinking about, maybe UFC 300 will be close to being the best card of all time. But when you look at it, when you zoom out a little bit and look at it as the 3 pay-per-view run of UFC 298, 99, and 300, there has never been a 3 pay-per-view run like that before, ever. I went and looked around all of these cards. I went and looked for lists of 3 pay-per-view runs. I looked all around the internet. I searched all around UFC, and I couldn't find any 3 pay-per-views in a row that stack up to these next 3. So we'll talk about 298 first, followed by 299 and 300. Coming up in just a couple of weeks, UFC 298. Opening up the main card, Ikram Aliskerov, Anthony Hernandez at middleweight. Banger fight. Ikram is a great prospect. Anthony Hernandez looking good. I think it'll be a great fight. Moving up, we got an absolute wrestling masterclass. Henry Cejudo versus the Machine, the absolute cardio demon, Merab Dvalishvili. I think that's going to be a banger. I think it could end up being just, can Henry counter him coming in on one of those chain takedowns? And can he, will he be able to defend the takedowns from Merab over the course of 15 minutes? Moving up, we got Ian the Vegan Magato Cherry versus Jeff Neal. As much as I don't really like either of those dudes, I like their fighting styles, and I think it'll be a really entertaining fight. Absolute banger of a featured fight. We got Paulo Costa versus Robert Whittaker, if it happens. Banger. Will help figure out the middleweight division a little bit, because I think the winner of that should face Hamzat in a number 1 contender fight. And main event, absolute banger. Could be one of the best fights of the year. Alexander Volkanovski versus Ilia Topuria. Featherweight championship. See if Volk can maintain his dominance or see if it will be the Ilia era. I think this card is absolutely stacked top to bottom. Moving up to 299, which might be even better. Now, I'm not sure if this is going to be the order the fights play out in. I just grabbed this screenshot off ESPN because the order on Google was definitely not right. But for the sake of the video, I'm going to be interchangeably with the Curtis Blades Jailton Almeida fight, throwing in the Piotr Jan Song Yadong fight. Now, Sean O'Malley versus Marlon Vera 2, main event, bantamweight title. The co-main event, easily fight of the night, I think here, guys, is going to be Dustin Poirier versus Benoit Saint Denis, 5-round co-main event. Curtis Blades, Jailton Almeida, or Piotr Jan versus Song Yadong. I absolutely love both fights. I think it's a great test for Jailton Almeida, great test for Song Yadong. Gilbert Burns versus JDM, Jack Della Maddalena. I love this fight. Gonna be a banger. Gilbert Burns, great all-around fighter. Jack Della Maddalena, one of the best boxers in the welterweight division. Kevin Holland versus Michael Venom Page. Absolute kickboxing clinic to be had between these two guys in this fight. And, of course, following this will be the UFC 300 we were talking about earlier. Now, I genuinely challenge you guys to go back and find 3 pay-per-views in a row that have this amount of depth throughout the main cards and try to compare it to these 3. I don't think there's anything better that's ever happened in UFC history. There might not be anything to ever happen again to be better than this in UFC history. And I think that is better for us as UFC fans than having just a completely stacked from top to bottom UFC 300. Because when you think about it, a full UFC card, say the prelims start, and we're talking about my time here, but let's just say what it is. The prelims start at like 8 o'clock and go till about 2:30 in the morning. That's what, 6.5 hours of fighting. But in this, the main card usually is 11:30 until 2 in the morning. That's 3 hours. You have that 3 times. You're getting at least 9 hours of absolute banger fights. Not to mention, there is good prelims on UFC 300. And there was good prelims on the cards that I were talking about. But for the sake of the length of this video, I was just talking about the main card of these. So I think people are overreacting or at least if they're saying that UFC 300 is terrible, I think they're just looking at it as a vacuum card of this is supposed to be the best card in 10 years. These only happen every 7 or 8 years or whatever it is. It's like, it is a fantastic card that follows 2 absolutely fantastic cards. We are absolutely blessed as MMA fans for the next couple of months, 3 months, and I'm excited. I think you should too. And Lucas Tracy, brother, unless you are getting pay-per-view points from Daddy Dana himself, shut the fuck up about how much pay-per-views it's going to sell. Why do you care? Worry about what fights are going on and what pay-per-views are leading up to it. Like, why are you so pressed? And instead of one really deep prediction video to make and prediction videos about main events and stuff, now you have 3 separate pay-per-views. You're going to make more bread over this, you know? I don't even make money off this. I'm not losing any skin in the game. But that's all I got to say. I think a lot of MMA fans, specifically Lucas Tracy, screaming into bags and bagging himself over the head with paper bags is definitely overreacting. And just sit back and enjoy MMA for the next few months, guys. I think it's going to be fun. Who gives a shit if Holly Holm and Kayla Harrison make UFC 300? It'll be fine. You'll live. You'll breathe. You won't lose sleep. You'll be just fine. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know what you guys think of the UFC cards we got coming up. UFC 300. Just drop your opinions in the comments. Like the video if you enjoyed, and subscribe if you love all things MMA. Now, go sleep.